All right, all right. Welcome back to another episode of the Behind the Back podcast. We are your hosts. I am Marcos Conan Negron, and beside me here, as always, is Ben the Jet Retz. Ben, how are you, my brother?
I am doing great, man. How are you?
I'm doing great. And are you sure? Are you sure you're doing great? Because we're going to be talking about some stuff today, and I'm a little worried about what you have to say.
Yeah,
Are you-
look, I'm really good at putting on a face. And what you're seeing right now is a lot of smiles, but internally I'm kind of freaking out because we're inching towards the season and there's some red flags.
So let's talk about it. So we're going to be discussing Eagles and Niners camp. What news have we seen? Any trends that are positive, disturbing, yikes? And then we have a glazing session for an Eagles legend, and then an ongoing saga that'll never end. And after that, we will finish off with our playoff predictions for the season. So let's start with the Niners. Ben, good news, bad news out of camp. What's been going on there? Enlighten me. Outside of the whole Brandon Aiyuk thing, we'll talk about that in a second. What about camp? What about everyone else? How's that going?
Do you want me to start with the good or start with the bad?
Man, let's go good vibes first, and then we can kill it.
Good vibes for yeah, that'll go really quick too. So all right. So honestly, I named off a bunch of players last week who had awesome camps for us. And specifically like Deebo Samuel he's been kind of stepping into like a leader role with Brandon Aiyuk being off the field, of course. And so he's been a monster all training camp long. He showed up to days he doesn't need to be there. And he's been awesome. So that's been a positive. Deommodore Lenoir has been really good for us. So Jair Brown has made an awesome leap. He's shown vast improvements from last year. D. Winters who's our linebacker, who's looking like he's going to take Greenlaw's place, at least until Greenlaw comes back. He's been filling that role really well and learning everything, taking the ropes as best he possibly can. And yeah, Kyle's been really thrilled with a lot of the new guys that we've got coming out of the draft, especially like Puny has been awesome. And in that first preseason game, phenomenal. I would not be surprised if he starts the season for us. So it's a lot of guys who have had some really good training camps, who, you look at them on paper and you're like, they're not really the stars of the team, but they're guys that you can expect to step up when it matters. And that's what you're kind of seeing, because now to get into the bad news of things, there's a lot of injuries going on. So specifically, I will start with a list.
Oh gosh, that's never a good thing.
It sucks, dude. I have to actually pull up a list to talk about all these injured players. So
there was like 23 guys, right? Something
yeah,
like that.
it's horrendous. So to name obviously the big ones, Dre Greenlaw went out in the Super Bowl. Everybody saw that. He's out through at least December. It looks like it could be all season. Trent Williams is obviously holding out for a contract. Brandon Aiyuk is obviously in and out, holding in and out, but he's not holding a burger. He's just holding in and out of the facility. Spencer Buford, he has suffered a broken hand. He'll be out 3 to 4 weeks. Christian McCaffrey obviously is out with a calf. Fred Warner was dealing with some things, but some foot irritation, but he's actually starting to kind of trend back to full health. Drake Jackson is a big hit. It was just announced earlier this week that he's out with a knee injury and he's expected to miss the entire 2024 season.
Yikes.
And that's a really big hit for us because he made a lot of progress last year and it was looking like he was going to actually kind of, turn into something really nice for the Niners. And he obviously still can, but we won't see much of him at all this season. So that's unfortunate. Elijah Mitchell is out with a hamstring. Ricky Pearsall is dealing with his third injury, which is the second injury. He has a shoulder thing going on, which he's had twice now. But before that, he had another injury. And so it's like we just drafted this dude and we can't even get him on the field. So that's a problem. Ambry Thomas broke his forearm in last week's preseason game. He's out for a number of weeks. Hufunga is trying to make a comeback right now. And we're hoping to get him back for the early part of the season. It's kind of unannounced right now when it'll be. But then the last bit of news, Kalia Davis was just announced that he's having knee surgery and he will miss half of the 2024 basically. So a lot of injuries up and down. And it's a little, not a little, it's very nerve wracking for a team who has aspirations of getting back to a Super Bowl after having lost it last year. And in a lot of ways last year, you can say that the 49ers peaked. You know what I mean? Like it was one of those seasons where everything seemed to be clicking. Even in the weeks where they had injuries going on, they still stayed competitive and found ways to basically win the game. It came down to a play here or there, which obviously is football.
Right.
But it's a frustrating camp right now, and especially with those holdouts and hold-ins that I kind of mentioned. Those are just another gray cloud that's kind of loomed over the 49ers training camp. And a lot of those reporters who have been close with the 49ers, who have attended all the training camps, they said essentially what all of us as fans of the 49ers were worried about, and that's that the players are affected by this. The players who are there and playing are affected by what's going on with the contracts and all the injuries that are happening. So vibes are down right now. And I don't know that, a preseason win out would fix that. Like, it's preseason games really don't matter. But, I do wonder if, like, you lose all those games, what does that do for you? It just feels like it's more like punching you when you're down kind of thing. So vibes are down, bro. And it's not looking too hot, but we will get some good news hopefully here in the next week. But it's not fun to be a 49er fan right now.
Yeah, I feel like this gives kind of shades of the 2020 season, right? Like, you guys had the 2019, made it to the Super Bowl, and then next thing you know, the year after, you were just riddled with injuries. And obviously, COVID and everything happened after, in between all that and whatever. But yeah, it's a little nerve-wracking. I heard that, you guys had your joint practices with the Saints canceled because Kyle was he said we didn't have enough dudes to field a legitimate practice the way that we want to. And how nervous are you? Because the vibes and everything are obviously taking a hit. Do you think that because of this, then the Niners are a little bit more prone to start the season off a little slower because the rhythm isn't, that rhythm that you generate in training camp with getting your reps? No, there's no consistent team with, getting these reps. I know that George Kittle hosted a little thing at his place in Nashville, and he got a few of those guys together to build rapport. But I mean, you're still missing you're fielding a 90-man roster right now. You're missing a whole almost 30 guys. That's not something that you want to deal with. So do you think that'll affect the Niners in terms of how fast they might be able to get out of the gate?
It will definitely affect them, yes. What I'm holding hope on is, I've talked about this core for the 49ers being together now for a number of years, 5 to 6 years. I trust that even with Brandon Aiyuk holding out, he's still very much a part of this offense and has been for the better part of, I guess, 2 years, because in the first year he was kind of in the doghouse, right? But for those 2 years, he's been a major part of this offense. And whether he was, the most targeted or not, he was used in damn near every play that they were running. And so guys like that, guys like Trent Williams, guys like Christian McCaffrey now, who has been with the team going on 2 years now, it's they've got this repetitive reps under their belt, and they've ran this offense. And on the defensive side, like, yes, Brandon Staley brings a new scheme to it, but with leaders out there like Fred Warner and Nick Bosa, I'm not super worried that, like, week 1 might be a bit rusty, and I'm a little worried about that game. But the Jets have a lot to figure out too, and they're kind of in a weird state right now too, right? So I trust that if you can get a couple wins under your belt, if we in the first 3 weeks go 2-1, it's going to be okay, because it's just about getting those first few games out of the way. And I mean, to be honest with you, there's a lot of teams out there who they'll have phenomenal training camps, but then they'll start the season and schedule or whatever the case may be, they aren't hot. When in training camp they were, and they were hitting on all cylinders. And so then it draws a lot of different questions For the 49ers, it's like training camp has been pretty broken this whole time, but where you can kind of trust that this team could, kind of put things together is on the actual football field where they've done this now for a number of years together. So I am worried, yes. But I do think that there's an avenue for the 49ers to find some success early on in the season.
Yeah, and I think that, so long as your guys, the main core is out there week one, no one's going to bet against the Niners. No, they're still going to be double-digit favorites in damn near every game that they're, involved in.
There's too
And
much firepower offensively and defensively,
yeah, they still have the talent, like you said. Like that's the benefit of just being that good and being that consistent. And the only way the season goes off the rails is stuff like this, but that's when it happens in season. And
Right.
a lot of these guys, are crucial, but there's also guys getting hurt that just affect the practice and not so much what you're going to be seeing on the field week one. And you, like you mentioned, you had, some of these rookies got good reps. Malik Mustafa looked really good, and Dominic Muni got to start. And I think, like you mentioned, like he probably will earn that starting role. I think that's going to be huge for the Niners too. So they got good young pieces. And Brock is staying healthy. That's also the main important piece there. So that's the guy you want getting the reps, because he missed training camp last year. Not to his effects, he was recovering, like you said. So when I hear this on the outside, I'm like, oh dang, like that sucks that they're not able to practice the way that they want. Because going through that level of injuries, it's just something that not many teams have to go through like that consistently. And obviously, we see a bunch of training camp injuries. JJ McCarthy went out for the season, stuff like that. But it is, I don't know how to feel. It's a weird situation. And again, on top of the Brandon Aiyuk stuff, and let's pivot to that a little bit. On top of the Brandon Aiyuk stuff, it's just got to be so frustrating, because you and I, again, I say this every week now. I've been saying this every week since the offseason started, that we just have the same conversation, and it's been pulled every which way. Reports were saying one thing and the actions being another. So let's get another update on the whole Brandon Aiyuk situation. So last week I asked you, I was like, what's the percentage that Brandon Aiyuk was leaving? And this was reports that the Steelers had an offer on the table, like ready to go, or Cleveland or New England, like he was, destined to leave. What do you have a different percentage now?
Yeah, I think there's a really good chance that Brandon Aiyuk is a 49er to start this year now. And this whole situation, like I'll answer your question and then I'll dive into it. So if I had to put a percentage to it, I think it's like a 95% chance that BA starts the season as a 49er. And we get that extension done. Now, to kind of dive into it, this negotiation for, I guess if you want to call it that, this situation between the 49ers and Brandon Aiyuk has been the weirdest contract situation that I personally have ever seen in football and basketball, in any sport. Like,
pretty crazy.
Every day something was changing with it, and you heard all these different reports. And I mean, look, the media is always going to spin things in the offseason because they're always searching for a story, right? But at the same time, on the other side of it, Brandon Aiyuk was giving them a story, because he's going out on social medias and he's commenting on things and he's going on podcasts and he's saying things, and none of that was necessarily him roasting the 49ers organization. But what he was doing was spinning stories. And so you'd put a spin on something, and then the media would spin it and then run with it. And then the 49ers would put a spin on it, and then they would run with that. And so it was this constant tug of war all off season long. Now, where this situation got really out of hand was Brandon Aiyuk was ready to sign a contract at one point. He had texted his agent, Ryan Williams, that get my suit. We're inking this thing today. We're getting this done. He was pretty much on his way to go sign when Amon-Ra St. Brown got his deal. That is when Brandon Aiyuk started comparing himself to other players. And that's where this whole thing got really out of hand. And it's not, I'm not like pointing a major finger at Brandon, because look, everybody as a wide receiver and a quarterback and a, whatever position, you're always going to be comparing yourself to other players around the league, right? But it was at that point where Justin Jefferson had gotten his paycheck, and then Amon-Ra got his paycheck, and then the whole CD conversation came out, and you saw other guys around the league starting to get paychecks. And so Brandon's starting to see this money come up, and he's like, all right, my new number is this. And the 49ers are like, well, we're not going to pay you that, because we're not going to utilize you to be that kind of, a contract, basically. And so at that point, like, the 49ers didn't offer him a contract since May, reportedly. And that was the last one that they offered him. Like, that's how stuck on a number the 49ers were. And for me to pivot to the other side, that makes absolutely no sense, because I've talked about on this podcast, like, Brandon Aiyuk is pretty much the future wide receiver of the 49ers. When you look at his style, he has a lot more longevity in this league than a guy like Deebo Samuel. And I love Deebo, but Deebo runs through freaking brick walls. That's only going to last you so long. And he's been phenomenal as a 49er, and I hope he's here through the end of his career. But there's a great chance that he's not. And there's a great chance that Brandon Aiyuk passes him up if he signs an extension and is the wide receiver one for a vast majority of the years here. Now, for that point, I was like, look, Brandon Aiyuk is somewhat close to Purdy's age. And so there's a timetable there. And it's like, these are two guys you can build around once this core starts to kind of, dwindle down a little bit. So for me, it was like, why, as the 49ers organization, are you not throwing a little bit more money at Brandon Aiyuk? But there was so many different reports that came out. Like, I don't even want to speak to all of it, because I don't know what of it is true, right? I'm speaking to what I know is essentially a fact at this point. Where we are currently up to is the Steelers have offered Brandon Aiyuk a contract. Like, they gave him a number that they would offer him, and he likes it. He likes that number. That number is rumored to be 28. Now, the Steelers put together a trade package many times with the 49ers, but finally have put together one that the 49ers don't necessarily love. I can't even say that they like it from what I'm hearing, but it's acceptable. And so the crazy. 49ers have kind of verbally agreed to it. And at the same time, they did meet Brandon Aiyuk at the table, because that offer wasn't that, prevailing in this whole thing for them. Like, it didn't make sense. It was like, we're going to get worse, so much worse without Brandon. So we need to get him to the table here and let's talk. Got him to the table, and they met Brandon at a number that he actually likes. So where we're up to is Brandon has agreed on some money. Now it's guaranteed money is the last hurdle, as well as years. So the rumor is that Brandon Aiyuk wants a 4-year extension, giving him 5 years total with the 49ers. The Niners want to give him a 3-year extension, giving him 4 years with the 49ers. So it comes down to the guaranteed money and the number of years extension. Obviously, as a player in the league, you always want to be guaranteed X amount of money. And you also want to be guaranteed X amount of money for a guaranteed amount of years. And so that completely makes sense. And if it only ever came down to the guaranteed money and the number of years that he signed, then why the hell are we still doing this going into the middle of August?
Yeah.
So it seemed like there was so much back and forth, and then absolutely nothing for a number of months. And the absolutely nothing bothered Brandon Aiyuk a ton, obviously. And that's why he hit social media as much as he did. Like, he didn't handle it well. His agent damn well didn't handle it well. Like, this got way out of control. And the 49ers definitely didn't handle it well either. So the whole situation, dude, has just been disastrous from the start. And it's frustrating because, you look at the other contract negotiations that the 49ers have had. Just let's look at the past 5 years. And they haven't been terrible. They haven't been great. But when you have this many stars on a team and you're consistently having to restructure and renegotiate and extend, like you're going to have these kind of things happen because stars are always going to be a little bit more divas than just role players. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because when you're a star in the league, you know you're a star. You know you're one of the top dogs. So why the hell aren't you going to pay me a top dollar? So that's kind of like my stance on it. Because people are like, I've had people text me, you've asked me, like, how does that feel? Like every year it seems like there's a new negotiation that just goes completely south for you guys. And it's like, well, this is kind of the norm when you have this many stars on your roster that you have to consistently try and keep. So look, it sounds like where I know for a fact we're at is that it sounds like we're coming up on a resolution to this whole thing. It sounds like BA's either going to be a Steeler or a 49er in the next probably 48 hours.
Oh, well, hopefully that is the case so we can put this Niners nonsense to bed. It's really,
I'm ready.
I think you're right. I ask you all the time, I'm like, how does this feel? Because I'm on the total opposite end of the spectrum, right? So, I just find it interesting because now this storyline doesn't escape you. The Niners can't escape this, right? So it's a lose-lose situation. And let's say the season starts out and the Niners are cooking. It's 3-0, 4-0, right? And Brandon Aiyuk's a huge part of it. And the Niners get to say, hey, look at us. We did things, it all worked out. Like, we're good. And Brandon Aiyuk's like, yeah, I made the money and I'm the guy. But then every time they lose, it'll be like, oh, the Niners sold. They shouldn't have sold. They shouldn't have let this contract negotiation go out. They could have traded him when they had the chance. Like, it's a lose-lose situation type of storyline. And the same thing goes for like Philly and the Eagles because it's a Sirianni Jalen thing, right? So it's like anytime we win, we can kind of put that to bed, but anytime we lose, that's going to be the only thing that's brought up. And the offseason drama stays. Like, it stays longer than it should, and people use that as a scapegoat answer response to, straw man's argument to prove their point. So it sucks because that's all we're going to be hearing this year is going to be one way or the other. For the Niners, it's going to be all about Brandon Aiyuk and how they handled this offseason, or the injuries. But that's got to just be frustrating. But hopefully, like you said, he signs and we can put all this to bed, especially at least a week before the season, so he can get in some practice reps and, practice with the team. Obviously, he's probably staying in shape, but he needs to stay more consistent and get some reps with Brock and all them.
Yeah, and that's, the thing with Brandon is if you want to say that Brandon Aiyuk being, in the hold-in situation was actually a good thing for the 49ers and him because like it forced them to look at each other in the mirror and yada yada. Well, it's like, no, actually, I think it made it a little more toxic because, and I wish the NFL would reconsider these hold-ins a little bit. Maybe there's a different way to handle them. Maybe it's a half of a fine because the thing is, like, Brandon's showing up so that he doesn't get fined. He's pulling a Marshawn Lynch. I'm just here so I don't get fined. I get it. I wouldn't want to be fined either, right? But on the other side of that, you're not playing. He's just been sitting on the sidelines and walking to midfield and having a holy dap in the center field that, was questioned for the next week. But he's not playing and he's not repping. And it comes to a point where it's like, why aren't you at least finding him a little bit for that? Like, or why aren't you guys figuring something out here? Because Kyle spoke to it. He was like, he was getting frustrated with the fact that Brandon was consistently in the with the situation. Rather, I won't even say that Brandon was doing this or that. He was just frustrated with the situation in general, and he's frustrated because it's wearing off on his guys.
Yeah, and that's the I agree with you. Like, the NFL could do something about this because that's the way it's structured. The players like Trent Williams are getting fined. He's paying, I think it's $50,000 the practice that's missed, but because he's not on a rookie contract. But since guys like Brandon Aiyuk, since guys like CeeDee Lamb are on their rookie deals, their fines are forgiven by the NFL. So it gives these guys on rookie deals the power to just hold in as long as they want and just say, hey, we don't get in trouble. So it's not going to be, we'll show up to the facility, but we're not going to get in trouble regardless. So it's frustrating that but it also gives them that power. So I guess this is where we see the struggle, right? But then a few years down the road, if Brandon Aiyuk wants to pull the same crap, he will get fined. But then at that point, he would have already made the money that he's wanting. So then 50,000 is nothing to him. But then again, he's making $14 million a year, so 50,000 is still probably nothing to him, even if he got fined. So it's the
Right.
frustrating part with these dudes with all this money. It's like, ugh, whatever.
Well, and a lot of the times, these teams will, for the holdout situations, they will have a signing bonus that's literally only to cover what they've fined the player. And so at that point, it's like, well, what was the point in this whole thing? Like at that point, just get the fines out of the way so that we can keep toxic locker room situations completely out of the picture. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
I'm ready to put this whole thing behind us because there's already so much shadow with the injuries. We need to get contracts to Brandon Aiyuk and Trent Williams, and I think it needs to happen yesterday because the season is coming up quick, and I'm so excited for the season, and I want to be excited for the season, but at the same time, I'm like, you can slow down a little bit because I got some guys who need to recover and some guys who need a contract.
Yeah, exactly. And so I guess, we'll pivot off the Niners here, but that was it. Hopefully we hear something, dude. We've been doing this week after week, and if we come in here next week and Brandon Aiyuk still is, about to be a Niner but still hasn't signed, I won't understand what they're waiting for at this point. If
We're
not
not
now,
talking
then.
about it. We're not talking about it next week. I promise you that.
This is
I'm
the
done
last
with it.
time.
I'm
Yeah.
done with it.
Until he signs, we're done. We were putting a moratorium on talking about Brandon Aiyuk until he's signed.
I would be shocked if he's not extended by the end of the weekend at the latest, honestly.
Okay. Well, hopefully that is the case. So, news on the rival camp over here in Philadelphia. All's going pretty well. I'm like, the vibes are still really good. Jalen Hurts still hasn't thrown a pick. It's been like 219 throws now. He's cooking. They just had their joint practice with New England, and obviously, New England is an inferior team, but it's good to get reps up against them. And the Eagles won their first preseason game against the Ravens on a game-winning field goal from Elliott, even though he missed a field goal and an extra point in the meantime. So it was like Elliott, he was that's one thing that, like, when you don't those random things are just going to bug me now, because like if there's one person who saved us a ton last year, it was Jake Elliott, and I cannot have him just start selling for no reason.
It's preseason.
It's preseason. Yeah, he's getting warmed up. So, but I mean, our rookies look really good. Like Quinyon Mitchell stepped up and played really well. Cooper DeJean is back at practice now, so that's really good to hear. Injury wise, we're not dealing with that many, fortunately. Like, we're doing okay. And our offense is looking good. We're installing more stuff, more and more as the offseason goes on, because I guess they weren't trying to play their hand right away, and they're still trying to figure out the nuances of the offense. Now, there is a little bit of concern on that offensive line, especially that offensive guard spot. Mekhi Becton played decently well, but there are reps where you can tell that we're just a little weak in that spot. So that is going to be something to monitor as the season progresses. And hopefully, Mekhi Becton has always played tackle, and then, for his first 5 years, and now he's moving into guard. So it is a transition, and he's playing that role well. And our offensive line coach, Jeff Statland, is, working his magic on him. So hopefully it pans out. But outside of that, everyone looks good, and the defense looks a lot better. They're mixing up coverages. They played all their starters in the preseason game just to kind of get them those reps, and they look good. So I'm excited to see how they continue to progress and what kind of noise we hear coming out of it. Like, and again, we have ticky-tack injuries, so it'll be, CJ Gardner-Johnson still in and out. I'm trying to think who else. I don't think anyone that important has been sitting out because of injuries. So our defensive line's looking good. I'm really hyped to just see like what happens. So vibes are good. The only thing that's, everyone wants to hang their hat on is the freaking Nick Sirianni, Jalen Hurts thing. And if that's the only excuse people want to throw up now, I'm cool with it, because that's old news to me. But they call it, it's one of the big storylines. So I'm not going to like dismiss it, because it's not nothing. So
yeah, and I feel like you got to get deeper into a regular season with nothing happening for those to kind of go out, out of the question, because it's been the biggest thing to talk about with the Eagles in the offseason, at least in a negative perspective. I did hear that you guys did some tush pushes though in that week one preseason game. Is that true?
Yes, and we didn't have, and we used Kenny. Kenny Pickett was able to make it work. And listen, I don't. I also think, I think it's something that I don't think it's going to be used to the extreme that we used it last year. I think part of that was because we were in just, we didn't have the kind of personnel to throw like a Saquon back there or just run up the gut. Um, I don't think we're running it 50 times this year like we did last year. But if we're goal line in one, and it's the safest play to run, like obviously you don't want to throw your $50 million quarterback in that many times. And I wonder how much of that is going to, if Jalen, there's never been a report on Jalen saying anything about the tush push. Because, so if he had something to complain about for it, it hasn't shown yet. So um, I think they're aware of just how dominant they are, and to have a play that's that special and tailored to them that they practice consistently is just, they might as well don't fix what ain't broke, because it definitely worked last year. So it will be interesting to see. But they did execute one with Kenny Pickett. And it was close. It almost didn't work either. So I'm like, maybe it's a Jalen thing too. So we'll see.
Yeah, I would get nervous running that play with how expensive Jalen Hurts is. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I think about what that dog pile looks like at the end of a play. And I mean, look, Jalen's come up out of it every single time. And, a vast majority of them, he's got like not a grin on his face, but he's like, it worked again kind of thing.
Just
And it's
chilling.
like, yeah, it's not, it doesn't look like it's affecting him in a physical way.
Mm-hmm.
Honestly, the guy that it probably affected more than anybody with last year was probably Jason Kelsey,
Yeah.
because he was the dude who was always on the bottom of that stack and he would always
Yeah.
move it so far forward. So
Yeah. That's
yeah,
1,300 pounds.
if you guys continue to use that play and it's working, I don't see any reason why it should stop. And the fact that people wanted it banned, it's just, I mean, why are you trying to ban something because you can't stop it? That's
Exactly.
just, you're going to ban the 49ers last year? I'm sorry.
Yeah,
That
exactly.
doesn't
There
make
you go.
sense.
Yeah, it's practice, right? Like any team, yes, you need a specific kind of personnel. Like Jason Kelsey is just special, but like you do need a kind of personnel to execute it. But it also, if you just practice it enough, you'll find what works and what doesn't work. So
Right.
clearly, before this became like a huge thing, they were practicing it consistently. So it just shows, they put in the work. So that's the part that I don't understand why people were so freaking out about it. But again, it's because you couldn't stop it. So, outside of that, I mean, I'm feeling really good about where this team is at. And, again, listen, like for the Jalen Hurts, Nick Sirianni drama, I think the last thing that was reported was it apparently has got to a point where Jalen and Nick had one-on-one meetings last year because Nick wanted to get a message across, and then Brian Johnson, the offensive coordinator at the time, had another message. And so there was no consistent message with Jalen, and it literally got to the point where him and Nick could not be in the same room together. And I think that's why they inserted a guy like Kellen Moore, because it's Kellen's offense. So Jalen gets to communicate with him the most.
Mm-hmm.
And I still think it's still kind of tenable where and I don't even think it's a Nick thing. I think it's a Jalen thing where like they prefer not to be stuck in the same room, just them two.
Yeah.
So, but I don't think that's something that these guys like Nick and Jalen have a huge track record of success. The collapse has been the flukiest thing for them so far. So it'll be interesting to see how they develop and grow from that level of thing, because Jalen, to me, he just seems like he's got his head screwed on straight, and that pressure that he felt last year, I think it's going to it's going to alleviate a little bit, because yes, the expectations are still high. This team has too much talent for them not to, you're not free of excuses. You have to win ball games, but I think this team can, and everyone's feeling good right now, and that's going to be a good energy to take in.
So speaking of an energy to take in, there was a legend that came to an end this week. Marcos, what happened?
Yeah, it happened the day after we recorded, so it was last Thursday. It was reported that former Eagles quarterback Nick Foles retired from the NFL. And Nick Foles, for those who don't know, led the Eagles in 2017 to their only Super Bowl. And the Nick Foles, so I'm going to take this time to just give a Nick Foles appreciation session here. So because Nick Foles had a very weird career. He never played more than 13 games. He had one incredible year, and both of his incredible moments came after he came in for an injury. And his first time was in 2013. He and Michael Vick was the quarterback at the time, and then he got hurt. And Nick Foles came in on that Chip Kelly offense in 2013 and ran the friggin' league. And he was 27 touchdowns, 2 interceptions, and 119 passer rating. That offense was clicking and unstoppable. And he also tied the NFL record in that season for touchdowns in a game against the Oakland Raiders, where he had 400 yards and 7 touchdowns. So he looked amazing. And then he just kind of didn't, and like kind of came back down to earth in like a major way. And he, before, coming back to the Eagles, he went to St. Louis and he went to Kansas City. And then when he came back in 2017, we had a young quarterback, Carson Wentz, in his second year, who flourished and was playing like the MVP up until week 13, when he tore his ACL diving into the end zone against the Rams. And me at the time, crazy to think how long ago that was now, was like everyone else, just a little bit nervous because Nick had came back, and we were like, we were aware that 27-2 Nick Foles was not the guy who was coming back. And it was a little nerve-wracking. And our season, we were the number 1 overall seed at the time, and we ended up finishing that season, the regular season, at 13-3, tied for the number 1 seed, but took the number 1 seed over Minnesota. And the 2 weeks before the playoffs started, Nick Foles was horrible. He was terrible. Like when he came in the week after he played the Giants, he dominated. He looked awesome. We're like, oh, Nick Foles is back. And then the last 2 games he played, let me see if I have those up here. I'm pretty sure I do. The last 2 games he played, they won against Oakland, but he only threw for 163 yards, and his passer rating was 59. And then the week after, it was a 6-0 loss to Dallas, where he only threw 11 passes, and he was 4 of 11, and he threw 2 picks. So, and so you're entering that, and then you go into the playoffs, you're like, oh crap, we're the number 1 seed, but nobody believes in you because you lost your MVP quarterback.
Yeah.
It's the same thing as like right now if Jalen Hurts goes out and we're stuck with Kenny Pickett. Like, it's the same drastic level of drop at that time. So we were skeptical, and Frank Reich was the offensive coordinator. And after that, those last 2 weeks, we're like, wait, we're playing with Nick Foles. We can't do the same thing that Carson was doing here. What worked with Nick Foles? Oh yeah, that RPO offense was what Nick really excelled at when Chip Kelly was here. So they spent that week before that first game against Atlanta and just implemented a few of them. And when I looked back at this Eagles roster, they were stacked. Like they had guys all over the field. Zach Ertz was at the peak of his powers. You still had, prime Jason Kelce and Lane Johnson. That offensive line was unbelievable. And then we had that running back trio of LeGarrette Blount, Jay Ajayi, which when I watched them run, I was like, oh my gosh, I forgot how dominant they were. They were just the 2 bruisers. And then you had Corey Clement, who was making extremely clutch plays, and he was an undrafted rookie. You had Alshon Jeffrey in his first year when we traded for him from Chicago, and he had an A.J. Brown style impact in terms of how good, we got our X receiver. Like, that was the guy. And we did it with a bunch of guys on the offensive end. And then on the defensive end, you had Malcolm Jenkins, you had Ronald Darby, Fletcher Cox was in his prime, and Brandon Graham. And I look back at that team, I was like, wow, I forgot how awesome that team was. And they led, that defense was one of the best defenses in the league that season. And they needed it, because when I went back through and watched all the playoff games just to like refresh my memory a little bit. And I forgot just how lucky the Eagles got on that run. That first playoff game, Nick didn't throw any touchdowns, but it was a defensive slugfest. And it came down to the very end where Matt Ryan was looking for Julio Jones in the back of the end zone. He slips, and then he tries to catch it and he misses it. And then the Eagles walk away. And then they go at home against Minnesota, who was also 13-3. And people were very confident in Minnesota upsetting the Eagles here. And Nick Foles goes for 4 touchdowns, looking incredible, throws for, I think it was 300 plus yards, and that whole team just shut them down. And then they have 2 weeks to prepare for the New England Patriots, who at the time were just, Tom Brady. It was 40-year-old Tom Brady, and they were still dominating, and him and Gronk. And then you go to that Super Bowl. They had 2 weeks to prepare. They had this game plan, and Nick played with his balls to the wall and delivered. You know, it wasn't just him. It was a remarkable team performance, and it was the most, still to this day, the most high-powered offensive showcase in a Super Bowl. And I believe still that game still owns the record for most yards by both teams combined total yards in a game. I think it was 1,185 yards combined.
That's it.
Yeah, exactly. Patriots had 600 total yards. The Eagles had 500 plus. It was neither defense could really make an impact. And obviously the strip sack by Brandon Graham was the game changer in that moment. But the other game changer was the play that defined the Eagles to this day, and that's the Philly special. And that's the trick play where Nick Foles, they did the wildcat formation. Nick runs off and he catches a touchdown right before halftime to put the Eagles up. I believe it was 20. I forget exactly what the score was, but it put us up 10. That's what it was. And it was even more important because Tom Brady, a few drives prior, had dropped a wide open pass on a very similar play. It went just over his hands. And the Patriots did what they did best and stormed back, and they didn't, and the Eagles didn't flinch. They responded. Then even when they lost the lead, they came back, and Nick led a game-winning drive, and then the fumble to set the turnover and put the Eagles up, and then it came down to just a Hail Mary at the very end. But that run for a guy like Nick Foles, it was just a guy putting together a special run at the right time, and it was just, it's something that you're not really going to see. You don't really see that in the modern NFL. And that's something that, for the guy, he will always be considered my GOAT. He's the guy who won us the Super Bowl. He's the guy who brought it all together somehow. And to put together a run like that just cemented his legacy, not only in Philadelphia, but the NFL, because that it just set the expectations even higher. And man, I still rewatch that game consistently. I miss that team and the impact that Nick Foles had. And, I wish him all the best, because he went after that season. That was pretty much it for him. He went around, bounced around teams, and, never ended up reaching that level of success again. But he will go down as one of the, having one of the all-time special runs, unexpected runs in NFL history. So thank you, Nick Foles, for everything that you did. He's also an Arizona alum, so bear down. That's always also something that was super cool. Only Arizona quarterback to make and win the Super Bowl. So he's a legend. He's a legend for just being an average Joe who actually took a team the distance. And I can't say enough about how happy I was, and I'm happy I am for him. So it was awesome.
Yeah, special season, special player that season too, and just a special run. I mean, I feel like there's not enough stories like Nick Foles, especially to the extent, to the kind of win that Nick and that organization got. That it really was a special run, and that was a special team. To be able to put together the season that they had, like with backs against the walls when Wentz went down, and it was, faith in Foles, right?
Yeah, exactly. I remember, oh man, I still remember the Super Bowl when we were at my mom's house, and I'm just running around. We have the game playing on both TVs, and I'm just running back and forth, getting excited after every play. Like it was, for that season, and it just goes to show that like everything just kind of has to go your way for the Super Bowl. It's more than just like having an amazing team, because Tom Brady and Gronk in that game really, they flexed like we're the best duo ever muscles in that game, especially in the second half, to kind of pull this thing together. And then the Eagles just rallied, and it's something that was not expected, and something that, to think that Nick Foles beat Tom Brady. Tom Brady lost to some interesting quarterbacks in the Super Bowl. When you lose twice to Eli Manning and then Nick Foles, it's interesting for sure. But and it was again, it was just a game for the ages because it was just one of those games that was good from start to finish, like nonstop action. Neither team really struggled offensively, and it came down to a few big defensive plays, and that's just something you always want to see. So it's an all time moment for an all time guy who was never really an all time player. So it's just for those teams out there. Let me offer this for the teams out there who, be grateful if you have a good backup quarterback situation because you never know when that spot's gonna be the brightest. And the Niners are very, a good example of this too with Brock Purdy making it as far as they did with him. You can beat the odds, and especially with quarterbacks, who aren't considered like the best. But if they're peaking at the right moment, then anything can happen and all the cards are on the table. So
Yeah, and I think another avenue for that is you never know how good your third and fourth string quarterback can be until you get to your third and fourth string quarterback,
exactly.
aka Big Brock.
Exactly.
So let's pivot here, and let's talk about our playoff matchups. Now we
All
did
right.
NFC, AFC the last 2 weeks. We talked about who our division winners were going to be.
Mm-hmm.
We set the playoff brackets. Now it's time to talk about who we got going all the way and winning it.
That's right. So we're gonna go conference by conference. I'm gonna start, or actually I'll let Ben start for the AFC, and then I'll go after him. Once we do the AFC, we'll do the same thing for the NFC, and then we'll inevitably pick the Super Bowl winners that everybody already knows is coming, but we'll maybe not in suspense. I'm just kidding. But let's all right, Ben, let's start with you, and we'll go through. Let's go like this. So obviously, the first seed gets a bye, right? So your 2 through 7 matchup, who do you have winning that matchup? And who's the matchup? Yeah, there we go.
Yeah, so just to rehash real quick, my AFC was 1 through 7: Ravens, Bills, Texans, Chiefs, Bengals, Browns, and Chargers. Now, for 7 and 2, I had the Chargers against the Bills, and I have the Bills winning that matchup.
Okay, that's nice.
Comes down to that experience.
That makes sense. Yeah, especially that would be really cool though if Harbaugh and that team ends up being really good. That'd be a fun game for sure. All right, your 3 to 6 matchup.
So that's the Browns versus Texans, and I've got the Texans winning that one. I've got a lot of faith in CJ Stroud and that offense this season.
I like that. All right, and your 4 and 5 matchup.
4 and 5, I got the Bengals versus the Chiefs, and I can't really bet against Patty Mahomes right now, so it's Patty.
Okay. All right, so then let's move on to the divisional round. Your 1 and your 5.
So it's actually my 1 and my 4.
Yeah, your 1 and your 4.
So I have the Chiefs versus the Ravens, and well, I actually have the Ravens winning this one.
Yes, let's go, brother.
Dude, I'm that offense is just, it's scary to think about what they can do right now, especially with King Henry. Like if he's healthy all year long and that offense is moving, whew, I don't know if Casey can stop that.
Yeah, and it will be very interesting to see, especially since they lost a few pieces. It's going to be fun. We're going to get a good glimpse of that week 1 and get to see how those teams are when they go up fresh. All right, your next matchup.
That's going to be the Texans and the Bills, and
that's going to be an awesome
this one
game.
Yeah, this one was actually really tough for me. I went back and forth because I can see both teams, but honestly I just feel like the Texans have got a little bit too much going on offense, and I feel like the Bills could run into a little bit of a wall at that point. So I've got the Texans moving on to the conference finals.
All right, so it's the Texans and Ravens in the AFC Championship. Who do you have going to the Super Bowl?
I got the Ravens all the way.
All right, I love that. Okay, this is good. All right, it's my turn then. So, as a refresher, my 1 through 7, I had the Chiefs at number 1, Ravens at 2, Jets at 3, Texans at 4, Bengals at 5, Bills at 6, and the Steelers at 7. So, first matchup, 2 through 7, Ravens at Steelers, or other way around, but Ravens and Steelers. I have the Ravens winning. Steelers will have a good season, but without Brandon Aiyuk on their side, they won't have the firepower needed to get the job done. So
hold on. If they had Brandon Aiyuk, does that change?
If they had Brandon Aiyuk and George Pickens, I'd have to see it first, but I'd get a little bold. I wouldn't be afraid to pick Pittsburgh if that was the case.
Even with that quarterback room,
Maybe, yeah. I think I'm a
all
little
right,
higher, not on Russ. I'm banking on Justin, but I'm a little higher on him than most.
that's
Um,
fair.
okay, and then my 3-6 matchup is the Jets and the Bills. I have the Jets winning this matchup. I have the Jets beating the Bills. To get to this point, they probably would have had to beat them once, and I believe that. I think that Rodgers versus Allen, that would be a matchup to pay attention to. It'd be a super cool
Yeah,
matchup. I just think the Jets have a little bit more firepower, and their defense is way better, so they'll definitely be a problem. And then my 4 and 5 will be the Texans and the Bengals. I have the Bengals moving on. I think Joe Burrow's experience. If they make it, if the Bengals are as good as you and I talked about when we both had them pretty high, record wise, I just think that if they're vibing like that and grooving like that, Joe Burrow in the playoffs is going to be really hard to stop. Um, so I have them moving on. So the divisional round, my first, my Kansas City Chiefs against the Bengals. So I got devious and I picked the Bengals to win this matchup because Joe Burrow's the only guy to do it. Joe Burrow's the only one to knock out Patty Mahomes in this recent successful era. And he did it at Arrowhead too. So he's also one of the quarterbacks who has been the thorn in the Chiefs' side a little bit. Like it's pretty even now. I think it's
yeah.
3-3. But I mean, nobody has that kind of record against Mahomes the way that Burrow does. And I just think that this would be the three-peat, man. The idea of the three-peat is so hard for me that I just think by this point that the Chiefs will be surprised. Like they're going to be chilling. They're at the 1 seed. They got the bye week. They're going to be thinking, they can rest on their laurels a little bit, even though they know what to do. And Andy Reid's awesome after rest. I just think the Bengals might get the better of them in this one. So I have them moving on. My 2 and 3, the Baltimore Ravens, the New York Jets. I have the Ravens winning and advancing to the conference championship. The Jets defense is great, but I also think the Ravens defense is going to give the Jets way too much of an issue. So I'll have them moving on. So Bengals at Baltimore for the conference title. I also have Baltimore moving on to the Super Bowl in the AFC.
I like it. I like
Yeah,
it.
you and I are high on Baltimore. We had them, up at the record for a reason, and yeah, I definitely think they'll come out. I think this is their year to come out of the AFC.
Yeah, and I do agree with you on the three-peat thing. Like I just talked about I can't bet against Patty Mahomes, but the idea of a three-peat for the Chiefs this year, and I mean maybe it's the hater in me. I don't really see it happening. I feel like they're gonna have a massive target on their head all year long, more than they've had since Patty's been in the league, and I think that could catch up to him this year.
Yeah, it gives me like I don't know how to describe it. It almost gives me like the NBA, how the West ended up being last year. Like every team was just so good that people were still thinking, "Oh, Denver is still going to do it. They still have the best player." And then it just, they at the end of the day, everyone else was just good enough to get the job done. So I have that feeling this year that everyone in the AFC just got so much better that the top of that conference, all 7 of those teams have, even on both of our brackets, have a legit chance. There's 10 teams that have a legit chance to make noise. So
Mm-hmm.
Kansas City, I don't know. And listen, maybe we'll be eating our words and they'll be 3 beating and Mahomes is the greatest ever, and we'll have that conversation when we get there. But we can hate all we want for the moment. So all right, let's go NFC. Ben, I'm just gonna let you take the reins. Go for it.
So NFC 1 through 7, real quick, as a little recap. I have the Niners at number 1. Then I got the Lions, the Eagles, the Falcons, the Cowboys, the Rams, and the Packers. So first matchup is going to be the number 7 Packers versus the number 2 Lions. I have the Lions winning. That one's going to be a close game though, and it's going to be another fun one. I think the Packers they're going to be better than last year, but they're going to still run into a little bit of a wall when it comes to getting past a really good NFC contender. So it'll be a nice experience here, but it's going to be a tough first matchup. Then got the Rams versus the Eagles. Eagles are going to take that one pretty easily. I think that the Rams offensively could give the Eagles a little bit of some issues, but I think ultimately the Eagles will come out in the second half and take that game. Now, Cowboys versus Falcons, I actually don't have that being close. I don't think the Falcons really have it in them. I think that they're just in a division that, they could make the most of. And I feel like the Cowboys will take a pretty dominating win over them. So that lines up my NFC divisional round, which is first matchup, the Eagles at the Lions. It's going to be a close game. Yeah. It's going to be a loud stadium. But I have the Eagles coming out of it with a dub.
I'll take it.
Next matchup is the Cowboys versus the Niners. We all know how those matchups go. Come on now. Niners take that one convincingly. That sets up what our dream matchup is, Marcos. The Eagles versus the Niners in the NFC Conference Final. And I have the Niners handily beating the Eagles this year. 82-0. It's going to be just an absolute romp.
I love that. That's freaking amazing. So the Niners and the Ravens on Ben's bracket. I love this.
Yes,
a rematch of 2012. That would be epic for sure. Okay, so my turn. 1 through 7. Philly at number 1. San Fran number 2. Green Bay at 3. Atlanta at 4. Dallas at 5. Detroit at 6, and the Seahawks somehow sneaking in at 7. That's a weird one, I know. That's going to be my weird take. So we'll start with the 2 to 7 divisional rivals, the Niners at Seahawks. Niners are going to dust them. That's just been the case, so the Niners will move on. And then just like you, I had the Green Bay Packers and Detroit Lions meeting in the first round. Only this time it's switched. It'll be at Lambeau, right? In this exercise, I had them winning. So I had them winning the division, and I also have them winning this first game. If the roles are switched, so like I agree with you completely in terms of if it was at Detroit, right? But if it's at Lambeau, you're taking Jared Goff out of that dome and in Lambeau in January, that's going to be freaking tough.
I fully agree.
So that's where I think, that's going to be the difference, I think, in the playoffs of these two link up is where they play. And that'll be a huge difference. But I have Green Bay advancing in this exercise. And then just like you, Atlanta and Dallas, I do have the Cowboys, unfortunately, dusting them because, again, Atlanta has not, with this core, has not been there yet. And, Dallas will take advantage of that inexperience. And unless Kirk is just dealing and that offense is really figuring it out as the year goes on, I don't see them competing when it comes down to it. So my divisional round, we got the Eagles and the Cowboys in a fun rivalry. That would be an amazing game. Definitely get the playoff ratings for sure. If it's at Philly, which it's slated to be here, Eagles are going to take this one. These teams just don't win on the road against each other. It's very rare that we see this, and they so often split. And I have that feeling that it's going to happen during the regular season, and then when it comes back to Philly's going to be rested and they're going to feel good. So I have Philly winning. And then a rematch of the divisional round last year with the Packers and the Niners. Green Bay is going to lose this game, and the Niners will continue to defend themselves and advance into what we mentioned, our dream matchups, because I don't know if it's us truly believing this as much as we just want this more than anything. If there's one thing that we've been missing is a true Eagles-Niners matchup that, isn't combined with injuries or rest disadvantages or all this nonsense. I just want a game where both of our teams are as close to full strength as possible, and it's a do or die. And obviously, I have San Fran losing in this situation and having Philly advance to play the Ravens in the Super Bowl. So now we each are facing the Ravens. Will our teams come out on top? Who do you have, Ben, winning the Super Bowl this year?
They don't call the 49er fans 49er faithful for nothing, man. I got faith that we take down the Ravens in the Super Bowl and we advance to our 6th trophy.
The quest for 6 is completed over on the Jets playoff bracket. I love it. That's great. So, Philly versus Baltimore. Both teams, super cool situations, both with a lot to prove. Lamar's first Super Bowl. I have Philly winning, obviously, but I think it's going to be, that would be a game for sure. I think it would be, that would be one for the record books in terms of just how crazy it would be. But I just think your favorite hashtag to throw at me last year was Cry Eagles Cry, and I did a ton of that this offseason, but the Eagles will fly high once again. So fly, Eagles, fly. We're winning it all this year. But I think for our other games that we had in this exercise, I think they'll be pretty good. I think they'd be fun to watch for sure.
I think the ultimately what we got out of this exercise is that the team we're the highest on, aside from our own, is the Ravens, and
Mm-hmm.
that's interesting. And I think it's pretty accurate because if I'm looking at the AFC, obviously we talked about 2 weeks ago how many awesome quarterbacks and defenses and just overall teams there are in the AFC. But I think that, look, I mean, we've seen the Ravens just kind of run into a number of different walls for different reasons. And I feel like they've really loaded up this offseason. And I feel like this is the year like they could really kick down those walls and make it all the way and really make some noise.
Yeah. Even they'll have 2 running backs now, right? So it'll be very interesting to see how that works out. And it would be so cool, I think, for Baltimore, and especially if, maybe it lines up to where they face the Chiefs again, and they're the ones who beat the Chiefs. That I think would, for them, it would also, I think that would be a prove it moment for them, that they can take out the best of the best and feel like they can really take that next step. So for sure, I think we're the highest on Baltimore. But next week we are going to be picking an official underdog team for the Behind the Back podcast. Ben and I are going to, we sent each other a picture of the betting odds, and we're only selecting a team from that has negative odds to make the playoffs, the teams that are slated to miss the playoffs. So there's a list we're going through. Him and I are going to come up with 3 different teams, and we're going to plead our case for why we should have at least one of these 3 teams as our team. So stay tuned for that next week, because it'll be interesting to see what you got. I have a feeling I know who you're going to pick, but I'm interested to see if we do land on a common team, and if we land on more than one, it'll be interesting to see who we pick.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like we have pretty much the same brain wavelengths a lot of the time, but I'm higher on a few teams than you are this year,
Same.
and vice
Yeah.
versa. And so this is going to be an interesting like little exercise. I feel like there's a chance we'll have like 3 of the same teams, but there's also a chance we'll have completely different
Yeah,
different teams.
exactly.
Like it's going to be fun.
Yeah, for sure. So stay tuned. That'll be the main part of our episode next week, and we're really excited to bring it to you. On top of Brandon Aiyuk news, because we know it's going to happen once he signed. If nothing happens, guys, we're sticking to it. We're not talking about him. So
I'm
but
done.
hopefully we hear some good news. But anything else you'd like to have, any final thoughts before we close out here?
I'm all good, brother. I'm all good.
All right, this is a fun episode. This was episode 53 of the Behind the Back podcast. You can hit us up at behindthebackpod13@gmail.com. Hit us up on any of our social medias that are listed above if you're watching on YouTube, or for any of you audio listeners out there, links are in the description below. Please give us a like, subscribe, rate the show, give us a follow, give us comments. Let us know. We're seeing a lot more comments that are really engaging, and I'm actually really liking this. So we appreciate the love and the hate. It's that's the whole point of sports. It's engaging conversation, and we appreciate the support that we've received. So thank you guys so much. I am Marcos Conan Negron. Beside me here, as always, is
Benny the Jet.
that's right, y'all. We love y'all. We'll talk to you next week. Peace.
Peace.